Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name's Erica, and today we're going to talk about all the books I read in the second half of March. Okay, so in the first half of March, I read 11 books, and I already have my wrap up on my channel, so you can go check that out. The second half of the month, I was definitely slumpy, and I only fully completed 5 books, and then I DNF'd 2. So let's talk about those books. The first book that I read in the second half of March was Bad Saint by Monica James. This is about a woman who gets kidnapped and she is on a ship with these 3 men. 2 of them are Russian and 1 is American, and she picks up very quickly that she's got kidnapped for human trafficking and she's going to be sold to somebody, and they're traveling across the ocean to go to wherever this man is that she's getting sold to. She was on a honeymoon with her husband that she was only with for a couple of weeks before they decided to get married when she got kidnapped. And yeah, so immediately those 2 Russian men treat her very, very poorly, but she kind of gets a little bit away with a little bit more from the American. She gets a little bit more kindness from him than the other ones. So it ends up being her romance with that American man, and it is very dark and there's a lot of trigger warnings, but I actually enjoyed this one quite a bit. I gave it 3.5 stars. The only real problems I had with it was there's like a big plot shift about halfway through the book where like something big happens and then the setting is pretty different. And I feel like the author used a lot of very convenient things for the plot. Like I can't really say much without spoiling it, but there's just a lot of things that happened that were very, very convenient, and they were just used as a way to kind of make sense of where they were and how it would work. The main female character was just a little bit inconsistent for me as well. There'd be times where she made really, really dumb decisions, which is fine to have like a young, gullible character who makes bad decisions. But then she would do something that was very smart and seemed like she had like a good survival instincts, but then she would do something that completely counteracted that. So I just feel like her character was very inconsistent and all over the place. But overall, I really, really liked the romance between the 2 characters, and I liked the fast-paced nature of the book. Yeah, there's just a couple things that didn't quite hit the mark for me, and I don't think this is a series that I will continue on with because it does have a couple more books in the series. I think it's a trilogy, but I just don't have interest in reading the rest, and it ended on a cliffhanger, so I feel like that tells you a little bit of something if I don't feel like continuing on after the first one. But it wasn't a bad book by any means. I actually enjoyed it quite a bit while I was reading it, but definitely not a new favorite. Then I read Devil of Dublin, and I've already talked about this once on my channel, but I hated this book. Hated it. Definitely my least favorite book of the year so far, and I am sad because I really, really high hopes for this one. I thought I was going to love it. So Devil of Dublin follows a American girl whose grandfather lives in Ireland, and she goes there like every summer to visit, and she is in the woods one day while she's visiting her grandfather, and she stumbles upon this boy who doesn't really talk, and he's malnourished, and she finds out that this boy is being raised by a priest in the area, and everyone says that this young boy is the son of the devil, and he's definitely like an outcast and no one talks to him. So she becomes quick friends with him even though he doesn't really talk to her. And each summer she sees him and visits him until one summer she doesn't go back. And then eventually she goes back as an adult and sees him again, and it goes from there. And now as an adult, he is a hitman in the Irish mafia. And yeah, it's definitely dark. This book just really did not work for me. And I actually really, really enjoyed the beginning, and I was pumped. I thought it was going to be like a new favorite in the beginning when they're kids, but then when they become adults and we start to see them interact as adults, it lost me. The plot was so convoluted. It didn't make any sense. There seemed to be no real direction in the plot, and it was all over the place. I feel like we didn't get enough relationship building in the beginning of this book when they're children. Not that you would get like a full romantic building like you would for adults, but we didn't see much of them interacting in the beginning as kids for me to really feel their connection as adults, because when she comes back as an adult, they just like automatically jump into a relationship together. And that doesn't really make sense to me. They didn't have that much of a connection as when they were kids. He didn't even talk to her. So I don't know how I feel about that part of it. I did actually really like how this ended in the epilogue. This was like an epilogue that I actually liked, even though it was way too long. There was a cute like moment that I'm glad happened in here. And yeah, but overall, I just really didn't like this book. It was definitely disappointing and I'm sad about it, but 2 stars. Next, I read a book I liked, and that was The Devil Gets His Dues by Elizabeth O'Rourke. I read this in one day on audio while I was shampooing my carpets and cleaning my couches, and it was really cute. It was a surprise pregnancy, which I know a lot of people don't like, but I really, really liked it actually. And this is the 4th book in the Devil series that Elizabeth O'Rourke has. And this follows our main character is best friends with the character from the last book. And then it's a romance with the hero in that book's brother. So they're planning, I think, an engagement party or a bachelor party or something for their wedding together. And they end up having a one-night stand with each other, even though they really don't get along and they don't really like each other. They have a one-night stand, and it actually happens twice in like one weekend. And then they go their separate ways. They live like on different sides of the country. And the main female character, which I'm blanking on her name right now, she finds out she's pregnant and she knows that it is our hero's baby. And she doesn't really tell him for like half of her pregnancy. And then when she finally sees her best friend and tells her best friend, she doesn't tell her best friend who the dad is. And then her best friend goes to a family dinner with her husband and her husband's brother, which is the baby's dad. And she mentions that her friend is pregnant and says like how far along she is. And he puts it together that there's a really good chance that that's his baby. So he flies out there and confronts her and then decides to move in with her until the baby's born, because he really wants to be in the baby's life. So it's forced proximity because they're living together and they really don't like each other. So there's a lot of banter going on. She has like a really poor eating habits and her job is very demanding because she's a doctor. And he's a little bit controlling of that because he wants her to have good eating habits and all of this and like take care of her body for the baby. And yeah, I just felt like there's a lot of good angst and tension, and I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was really solid. The only thing that I will say is this would have been a 5-star for me if it weren't for the fact that she was so drunk during the 2 times that they hooked up. She didn't remember it. And he did. So that kind of rubs me the wrong way that she was like so drunk that she knew that she did it because she woke up next to him and like knew that, put all the clues together, but she doesn't remember actually doing it. So I feel like that's a little bit of a red flag and something that I don't love. But if that wasn't there, this book would have been a 5-star for sure. Elizabeth O'Rourke tends to just have like one problematic problem for me in her books that makes me have to knock it down a little bit. So that's unfortunate because I really love her otherwise, but that was the case for this book. And yeah, but like I said, I really, really loved it. And if you can look past that aspect of it, I think it's a really good book. Next, I read Waking Olivia, also by Elizabeth O'Rourke. And this is about Olivia, who has a really traumatic past. She's a really great runner, but she ends up having to go to a different college for running because of something that happened at her last school. And she actually suffers from sleep running due to some trauma that she's had. So she'll get up in the middle of the night while she's sleeping and run for miles and miles barefoot and be exhausted by the time she shows up for practice. So she joins the track team at a different school, and the track coach there doesn't really like her, doesn't want to give her a chance, and sees that she's coming to practice, not giving it her all, but little does he know it's because she's like sleep running at night. So he ends up finding this out and ends up sleeping in the same house as her to try to stop her from sleep running. And then they have a very slow burn romance. I really, really loved this one again. I feel like there's the third act conflict I didn't love so much because it was like other woman drama. And also, again, the problematic thing, Olivia fat shames in this book quite a bit. She also has distorted eating habits. So if that's a trigger for you at all, I wouldn't read this book. She also ends up being a nutritionist, which I thought was an interesting choice considering she fat shames people. And that's like not addressed again. It's just like she fat shames people on a couple occasions, and it's never like then she got help for her whatever was going on with her and her body and fat shaming. That didn't happen. It was just like, oh, she's a nutritionist. And I was just thinking how I would never want a nutritionist that felt so negatively about people who struggle with unhealthy eating. So yeah, I just feel like that was a weird aspect of this book. And like I said with Elizabeth O'Rourke, I feel like those two things could have just been taken out and it would have been the same exact story. So I'm not really sure why she included those two problematic elements in the book. Like in Devil Gets His Dues, she could have easily just had her remember and have been drunk and it would have been fun and whatever. Like she didn't need to not remember it. It did kind of play into the storyline a little bit later on, but it could have just totally been erased. And then with Waking Olivia, there was no need for her to fat shame at all. So yeah, I gave Waking Olivia 4 stars. It would have probably been a 5-star if it wasn't for the other woman drama and the fat shaming. So the other book I read, I actually finished on April 1st, but this is like a 600-page book, and I read like 550 pages in March, so I'm counting it for March. And that is Saving Six by Chloe Walsh. This is the 3rd book in the Boys of Tommen series, and this follows Joey and Aoife. I can never think of how to say her name, but it's Aoife, I'm pretty sure. So this, like I said, is very, very long. It is like 613 pages. Yep. And this is like the tall paperback. So it's quite the story. I will say, if you've read Binding 13 and Keeping 13 in paperback, the font in there is so tiny, but the font in this one is like normal size at least. So I think it is overall shorter, but it still felt really long. But I just love these characters so much, and I don't care how long it is. And I just got Redeeming 6 in the mail, and I think it's one of the biggest books I own for sure. I mean, I own Kingdom of Ash, but it's probably the same size. So it's huge. It's like 800 pages, but I'm excited to get to that one. If you don't know what this is about, this follows Joey Lynch. He's the brother to Shannon in the first book, and he is a hurler, and he is kind of like the head of household, taking care of all of his little siblings because his mom's pretty neglectful and his dad is an abusive alcoholic. So he really takes on like most of the responsibility in the family, starting at like 12 years old. And this is his romance with Aoife, who is his boss's daughter, so it's a little bit forbidden. And this starts off as them just being friends and then slowly turns into more. And yeah, it was really, really sweet and emotional, and I just love Chloe Walsh's writing so much. I could gush about this book all day. I didn't connect with this book quite as much as Binding 13 and Keeping 13. I think I will in the second half, Redeeming 6, because of just where this book ended off. I think Redeeming 6 is going to be much more emotional and hard-hitting, but yeah, so this one didn't quite hit me as hard. I'm gonna give it a 4 stars, I think. It also took me like 200 pages to really feel invested in the story. But overall, I love Joey, I love Aoife, I love all of the characters in this book, and it's emotional and sad, but it's also heartwarming, and I love the way that Chloe Walsh depicts young love. It just is like so true to what your first love is actually like, and I don't know, I just really love that about this book and her writing. So yeah, I'm really just so happy I got this done, and I can't wait to read Redeeming 6. The 2 books I DNF'd. I'm a little bit scared to admit this, but I DNF'd Mother of Death and Dawn by Carissa Brumman. So I read 300 pages of this, and this is, I think this is soft DNF for now. I think I will go back and try to read it again. The problem that I had with this book is I was listening to it on audio and reading along, but then I started just listening to it while I was like kind of doing other things, and I read like 100 pages that way, and I got pretty lost in it. And I think that's partially because I was listening to it without looking, like following along with the book, but also because I was just bored and losing interest, because the romance in here really takes a back seat, and it's really just political and a lot of like war type talk, and those aren't my favorite types of books, and I find that stuff really boring, and it's just not something I love. So although I loved the first book and it was on my favorite books of the year, this one just really wasn't working for me, and I just could not push myself through it. And I think next time, if I try to read this again, I'm just going to sit down and read it with my eyes without the audiobook, because that's how I read Daughter of No Worlds and I loved that book. And then Children of Fallen Gods, I listened to the audiobook and followed along, and I give that book 3 stars. So I don't know if it's just like a me thing or if it's just the directions that the book is taking, because the first book didn't have much like political war stuff in it. It was a little bit political, but there was more romance in it. And this book, the second 2 books, just kind of like, I don't know, they didn't have much romance in them at all, so I lost some interest. And there's just like a lot of battles and political stuff that I don't really love. So I think I will go back and try to reread this at some point. But for now, I'm DNFing it and I'm taking it off my series list. And I'm just going to stop thinking about it for a little bit, and then I might try to come back to it at some point if I feel like it. The second book I DNF'd this month was The Wreckage of Us by Brittany Cherry. And I'm a little bit surprised by this because I actually really like Brittany Cherry, but it just felt forgettable for me, and it was definitely just going to be a 3-star read, so I decided to DNF it because I want to read books that I love. And this follows a 18-year-old girl whose mom is a drug addict and her stepdad is abusive, and he is like the meth dealer around town, and pretty much everyone in this small town is like addicted to meth. Not everybody, but a lot of people, and it's basically like his fault because he's a dealer. So this girl ends up getting kicked out of her house and she needs a job, so she goes to this ranch nearby and gets a job. And the main hero in this book is the nephew of the person that owns the ranch, and he kind of like runs things for him. And he immediately does not like this girl because his parents were addicted to drugs because of her stepfather, so he doesn't like her because of that. And then they end up having like a forced proximity situation because she needs a place to live, so the owner of the ranch makes him let her move in, and they join in a friendship first, and then it kind of starts to build from there. The main hero is a member of a band, and she thinks that the songs they write aren't very good. Like she thinks the band's good, but she doesn't like the songs that they write, like the lyrics. So she helps them write some songs, and it was fine. It was just going to be a book that was really forgettable for me. I could already tell, and I wasn't obsessed with it. So I'm trying to be better about DNFing books that I know I'm not loving, so that way I have more time to read books that I love. So those are all the books I read in March, and I can't wait to come to you in April and talk about all the books I read in April. And yeah, that was it for this video. So I'll see you soon. Bye.